Yes, I know. The microphone on an HP computer, to call it pathetic would be a compliment. Yes. Not all, but on these. So, and I was trying, I was actually at home and I was actually trying to speak straight into it. Yeah. That's why I'm using that for these classes, because it is infinitely better. So, and I apologize for that. Everyone got the message. So I'm glad I didn't make it more complicated than it needed to be. But that is one of the things you live and learn. Now at home, I have a much better microphone for recording. So in the future, that shouldn't happen if I end up recording from home for some reason. Here, I use one of these things and they work very well. So at least I haven't had any trouble with them so far. So what I'd like to do at the beginning here is go back into course modules. Okay, every week I will tell you we have to send a report to the registrar and to the deans as to the progress our students are making. And that report is that anybody who's making less than a C+, I have to highlight and say why. Okay? Usually it's because either they're not coming to class, voila, as we can see from here, or they're not doing their assignments. So what I want you to do every week, I want you to look at your gradebook. If you see a dash for an assignment that was due that week, it means you didn't submit it. If you see an icon for a discussion or a paper or a quiz or something, that means you did, and I just haven't finished grading it yet. Or, which is another distinct possibility, what I often do is I will wait until I've graded everything that's been submitted in a week and then record all the grades at once. That may not be ideal, especially for the OCD among us who want to know how they're doing right now this very second. So I try, understand that. But a lot of times I will do a very fast look to be sure that everyone has gotten the gist of the assignment and done it correctly. And then I'll go back and actually do the grading at another time. So if you see a dash, that means you haven't submitted. But remember that a whole lot of things that are upcoming, you won't have submitted. So don't look at those. Look at the ones for each week. And if you haven't submitted something, please submit it. Because I have to report those missing assignments. So we're trying our best to try and keep people current in their classes. So for those of you who haven't submitted everything from last week, please do so as quickly as possible. All right? This is a large enough class, and we have some students who have a long history of waiting till the last week and then doing everything at once. You can imagine that that doesn't make me real happy to suddenly get 20 assignments to grade unexpectedly. Now, in the case of somebody like Mimi, who is probably doped up on painkillers, I don't expect her to be trying to do this stuff. I mean, the work might make for a great comedy act, but it wouldn't help her grade any. So I'm not worried about those kinds of incidents. What I am concerned about is people falling behind and then trying to catch up. Usually what happens when you try to catch up, your work is not up to your capacity for performance. And that will affect your grade. Simple, straightforward calculation. So please get them in. Now, Daily checkpoints. Most of you guys are doing them. But I sent out a set of instructions and an announcement reminding you to do your daily checkpoints. We keep them open for a day. Last mod, because we had some issues, I opened up checkpoints for an extra week for 1 week. But we're not supposed to do that, although we have some leeway. If there are problems, remember, 4 of those checkpoints are included in your point total for the class. The other 2 each week are extra credit. Okay, Jessica.
There's like a couple of really like trick questions.
As an example.
I missed. And I'm really bummed out about it.
Yeah, last mod you missed 0. Yeah. Yeah. You're one of the few students I've had who has missed none. Usually students who miss any, who get a 0 on a checkpoint is because they forgot. Yeah.
This mod, these ones, trick questions where there's very article. You know what I mean? Like there's just.
Yeah, well, yeah. Some of them are cakewalks. You know, I look at some of them. When we first started doing these, we had a dean that didn't like them, so he would put in things like College America is awesome, true, false. You know, we had a little chat with him about that, and it stopped because they really should at least make you say something related to the class at the very least, right? Yeah, and some of them are going to be subtle, some will. Because you're going to run into subtle differences, especially in communication. You're going to run into very subtle differences. All you have to do is watch a politician weasel word an answer to know what I'm talking about. I remember during the Bill Clinton impeachment proceedings, which most of you probably don't remember, although you might. I remember him weasel wording an answer, and I just laughed myself silly over this because it was a typical politician answer. He said in response to a question, and I don't remember the question, I just remember the answer. That depends on what the definition of is. And I still remember hearing that and thinking, you fool, why don't you just give the truthful answer and admit it? Just be an adult. Yeah, that depends on what the definition of is. And that's the kind of thing that of course makes politicians and lawyers look pretty bad in our society, but it is the kind of thing that you'll run into. There are subtle differences, and some of them are inherent in English. Some of them, like, did you realize that there are 2 forms of the word diverse? There is divers and diverse. Diverse without the E means like discussing the diverse societies on the planet, the multitude of them. Whereas diverse with the E is little differences in like those cultures and like in people. So there are some very subtle, because I've seen both spellings, and the first time I saw diverse without the E, I said, yeah, these guys really ought to proofread this. You know? So I actually looked it up, and it's a legitimate word, and it was being used properly in the context that it was used. So we do have subtleties in this language. So don't, so be prepared for that. And in the business world, which, well, you're medical, Erica, but you three are business. You're going to find those subtleties can be very, very annoying at times, because people will use them as ways to control the conversation and for deniability. I remember during the first time I heard the phrase plausible deniability was during the Reagan administration. And some stuff was going on in the Reagan administration that was absolutely and completely illegal and unconstitutional. And yet Reagan was shielded by the people working for him so that he could plausibly deny that he knew anything about it. That was my first exposure to that term. And it was sort of like, yeah, here's how we get manipulated. This concept of allowing people to plausibly deny that they knew anything about it. When if that were the case, the president should have fired them, because they were putting him at risk. But it was going on. It went on. Ever since then, we've had that phrase as part of our political dialogue. So we have to remember that part of communication is miscommunication. We're going to spend some time this week talking about listening, because whenever you hear anything, especially in, well, politics is obvious. We don't talk politics here in class, obviously, but especially in politics, you have to really go back and take a look at what the person was saying. I don't care if they're in your political camp or not. Be careful with what you hear. Be careful with what you interpret, because they're trying to manipulate you. That's the whole purpose of political discourse, is manipulation. So you need to go back and listen. Well, it's the same in business. Advertising is all about manipulation. And the language we use in advertising is really loaded with ways of manipulating. And I'm not talking about other forms of getting people to purchase, your goods and services. I'm talking about the language we have that makes it sound like you're really stupid and behind the times if you don't buy my product. They don't ever say that, not outright, not seriously anyway. But they do have an issue with using language in a way that manipulates the thought processes. There is a wonderful video, and it's from the early 1980s, I think. It was, might have been a Frontline special on PBS, called The Merchants of Cool. And it's all about how Madison Avenue, which is, of course, the place where we used to associate all the advertising agencies. Of course, none of them are there anymore. But that's what we used to associate with the advertising businesses, Madison Avenue in New York City. And how they manipulate teenagers, especially teenage boys, to buy their junk. And the language they use and the subtleties. And nowadays, it's even more obvious that they're playing on the sensitivities, especially of teenage girls in our society. You have to be really looking at what's said. Why is it being said? Why are they trying to make this stuff look like it's the coolest thing that you've ever heard of, and you must buy it? And what does it actually do for you? And the message usually is this is going to make you cool. It's going to make it's going to make all the boys swoon or all the girls swoon or whatever. It's usually something like that, but it's all about getting you to buy products. And that's what advertising is. Advertising is creating a reality in which you must have that product. Advertising's always done that. And of course, reality, I remember getting into a discussion with a marketer one time, and he was talking about a marketing campaign. This was when I was in the pharmaceutical industry, and we were marketing a product, and I can't remember what that product was. It was some sort of consumer product. But we got into this discussion of what they were going to use as their marketing message. And I looked at him and said, but, because his whole marketing message was this scenario that he was building up that to me was just creating a perceived reality in the minds of the consumer. And I said, but that's just a perceived reality. And he looked at me with an absolutely straight face and said, what other kind of reality is there? We create, and he's right. Reality is perception. And so communication, in many ways, is about creating that perception of reality. And honest communicators are talking about reality that really can be demonstrated to be important and real, whatever that means. I mean, to be honest, the concept of reality is really mutable in this society. But nonetheless, you don't want, if you're going to have a hard time convincing somebody on a day like today that the sun never rose, right? If you've been outside at all, which you had because you had to come in here, it's pretty obvious. Reality was we had sunshine today. Another part of that reality was it was way too hot, way too early in the year, in my opinion. But that's my reality. We have some friends who think it's just great. It's finally warm. I look at them and say, and you live in Colorado? Yeah. But nonetheless, reality does differ. And that's what, hey, Dan, that's what pervasive speech, which is the subject of this week's discussion, as you may have noticed, is all about. Is all about creating a reality in the minds of those. Yes, she is not well tonight. She had an accident on Wednesday and broke her jaw, messed up her neck and back, and she just emailed me and told me that she is going to Zoom in.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got her set up. You're welcome. So reality does depend on the message you're delivering. And we adjust reality. I mean, what Hollywood's all about, creating a reality that doesn't exist. Think about Star Wars. I'm a big fan of Star Wars, so I'm not knocking it. But it is not reality. It is pure fantasy. As a hard scientist, I laugh at some of the stuff that goes on in Star Wars. But it's great fun to watch. Okay. All righty. Let's see. I think. Okay. Sounds like Mimi's on. Good. Welcome to class. We're just talking about the use of language to persuade, and we're going to go on and talk about a few other things as well. So you can either, if you have anything you want to say, go ahead and send me a chat. And I'll get back to you as quickly as I can. All right, so now we're just sort of, I sent actually the link to everybody, and I'll send out when it uploads and I can convert it to a YouTube I'll send you the link to that as well. And you can tell me if the sound is working this time. So persuasive language is the creation of a reality in the minds of the listeners. If you're working in a business setting, you would hope that that reality has some relationship to something other than hype, that it actually is a situation that is, I hate to use the word real because, of course, I just said that reality is perceived. But nonetheless, there are some obvious real things. This is a solid desk. That's real. I didn't put my hand through it. Even though a physicist would tell you it's mostly empty space, because the atoms that it's composed of are 99% empty space. So why can't I put my hand through it? I don't know if any of you ever saw the movie, What the Bleep Do We Care? Remember that movie in the 90s? You might look it up. It's probably available on Netflix. It's an interesting digression on quantum physics in an entertaining way. But in one case, there's a kid playing basketball and he walks through a wall because, of course, both he and the wall are mostly empty space. Now, of course, if I tried to walk through a wall, I'd have a black eye real fast, maybe a broken nose, because it may be mostly empty space, but there's a whole lot of reasons for saying that that space is only empty in a probabilistic way. And therefore we can't walk through walls. That's reality. But it is also reality that everything is mostly empty space. So sometimes realities compete. All right. So what persuasive speech is about is really the topic here. Did you all take a look at the videos and read the articles this week? Yeah. The videos are real short. The longest one is like 7 minutes. The articles vary. And I think the longest one probably takes about 20, 30 minutes to read, actually. If you're a fairly quick reader. If you're a slow reader, it might take 40 minutes to read. But nonetheless, there are plenty of there's plenty of good information in those. So they're talking about persuasion, and we talked last week about delivering an unpleasant message, and you all did a good job on talking about that, and gave some good examples. So I think that this week you're going to be talking about the drawbacks to the various approaches to the persuasion, to persuasive speech. And in the case of persuasive speech, what you're usually doing in most situations, what you're usually doing is presenting an issue and then presenting a potential solution. In the medical field, the issue may be, Erica, it may be related to a disease treatment. There are lots and lots of diseases that have multiple potential treatments. And there are a couple of ways of doing it. Medical personnel do not have a long and good history of consulting with their patients about medical treatments. They usually say, well, this is what we're going to do. And I can tell you of some times when I had disagreements with medical personnel for family members. At one point, my mother had a very serious problem with a blockage in her small bowel. She was about 70 at the time, I'd guess. It's been a long time ago, because my older daughter was only 2 years old when she passed away. So it's been a long time ago. But she had this problem, and my dad was retired military, and she had served in the WACs during World War II. So her medical care was at Walter Reed Army General Hospital when that still existed in Washington, D.C. And we walk in, and I'm sitting there. I've been working in the pharmaceutical industry, and I've been working very, very closely with about 25 MDs. So I had lots of people to talk to about my mother's medical condition, and I did. But we had the problem, and so I just asked this young doctor, and he was young. He had just finished medical school, and I said, well, tell me what's going on with my mother. And he looked at me with this disdainful look and said, well, in order to do that, I'd have to write the book on gastroenterology. And that really ticked me off. So I sat down in a chair and said, I've got all afternoon. Oh, he was mad. And I protested to others, and he was taken off the case. And we were given a doctor who actually talked to us. So in the medical field, there's a long history of that. But there were also many, many doctors. And the guy that replaced this one was an example of someone who said, well, here's the issue, and here are the things we can do about it. And this is what I suggest, and this is why I suggest it. And you did sort of that with the car in your discussion. Here's the problem, here's my suggestion, and you really consulted with the guy in that example. Well, good. Well, it's good, though, to have somebody who's willing to sit and discuss and not act like, well, here's the answer, take it or leave it, which is what so many people do. Yeah.
Can't say such harsh things.
Yeah.
It's gonna blow up. Sorry.
Yep. Replace it now or whatever. Yeah. No, I think, but again, that was an explanation. Here are your options, and he gets to choose. And in the medical profession, the patient gets to choose. You all know that we're taking care of my 98-year-old mother-in-law, and she had a particularly bad week last week. And at one point, she was really ill, and we said, well, okay, we'll take you to the urgent care. And she just said, no, they'll just fix me. But, that's a hard thing to hear. And my wife was hearing it from her mother, and I'm hearing it from my mother-in-law. It's a hard thing to hear. But you know what? The patient has the right to say that. One of the rights that patients has is the right to refuse treatment. So we called my wife's sister, who had been a medical records administrator for her career, and we talked to her at length, and she said, well, she does have the right to refuse, and we have the duty to listen. So we did, and she pulled out of it. Tough. She's a tough lady, but she pulled out of it. So, there are times and there are places when that's a good idea. But when you are going the other way, when you are in a business situation, and there is a problem, one of the most common ones, and in the pharmaceutical, I was in the pharmaceutical industry for about 25 years, and so I used to sit on my company's governing committee for all of our drug development research. we would have to look at issues that arose during the development of drugs. You have to understand that it sounds like the pharmaceutical industry is just throwing drugs out the door all the time. And to some extent, that's true. But the ratio of drugs, potential drugs that are discovered and shown to have some potential for activity, because most of the stuff we ever made was suitable only as doorstops. I mean, didn't do a thing. Either that or they killed everything they touched, one of the two. Not exactly good medical practice. So it's about, at that time, the ratio was about 15,000 trial drugs that had to be studied in order to get one on the market. And it's no better today. So so most of our drugs failed. Most of the drugs that anyone investigates fail. And either before they get into clinical trials or all the way anywhere up to very late in clinical trials, problems arise. So we'd have to discuss that. And there would always be someone who was passionately in favor of continuing research, unless a drug flat out killed someone, which never happened while I was there, although it does happen fairly regularly in the pharmaceutical industry. It never happened to our company while I was involved directly in that process. But there's always someone who passionately wants to continue and will give you lots of rationales. We always gave them the chance to talk and then made our decisions based on scientific data. And marketing to some extent. You know, you're not going to sell a whole lot of drugs if 1 in 1,000 people who take it die. You know, even if it's the only thing around to treat a disease, there's going to be a limited market for it. So we used to listen to our marketing folks as well. But sometimes they were the most passionate in favor because all they could see was billion-dollar sales numbers, you know. But there was always a reason to try and persuade the group to say, no, let's not cancel this project. Let's keep it going. And yet, we kept it, you know, we would not, you know, we looked at the data and made our decisions, but we had lots and lots of good, solid discussions based around someone trying to persuade us to continue, or as occasionally would happen, someone looking at us and saying, you know, we got to drop this. And others in the room are saying, no, we can't drop this. It's too important a product. Well, there was a story many years ago about a drug that not at my company, but at another company, where a drug that was being developed, one of the researchers had a feeling. You know, here's, you know, a gut feeling, and believe me, there's physiological reason for gut feeling. We actually have brain cells in our gut as well as our heart. And so they actually do some of our thinking for us. In fact, one of the major neurotransmitters, serotonin, actually is synthesized in the gut by gut glial cells. So this guy had a gut feeling that there was something wrong with this drug. And he saw it in some of the animal studies. And he was absolutely insistent that before that company put the drug into human beings, that it be tested in monkeys, primates, because they're closer to us. They're also different from us, but they're closer to us. And everybody said, no, that's too expensive, because doing monkey research is hideously expensive and it's highly regulated. But he really presented some convincing arguments. They made the decision, and they didn't just go with any primate. They went with a chimpanzee. And that's pretty darn close. Chimpanzees and bonobos are 99% genetically identical to all of us in this room. So they're pretty close. So they gave a small dose to a chimpanzee, and the chimpanzee, within a matter of an hour, was dead. That project immediately got dropped. But it was because somebody saw something, and he just had that gut feeling that it wasn't going to work. He convinced them to spend several $100,000, because you just don't go out and buy a chimpanzee. And you have to have special permission from the NIH, and you have to work with a primate center. And if anything happens to the monkey, you get to pay a fortune. Cost them several $100,000. A whole lot better than several $100 million in lawsuits, for sure. But nonetheless, that was persuasive conversation. And that's what persuasion's about. Fortunately, most of the time, we don't have anything that important. We might just be persuading our significant other what movie we want to go to. You know, I want to go see Solo. Oh, I don't want to see that. I'd rather see, RBG. But, that's also persuasive presentation. This is what, or going out to dinner. And that's always a negotiation in our house, going out to dinner. Because everybody has different likes and dislikes. So it is, so you're going to be doing that. But there are a number of different approaches. There in the discussion, in the introductory part of the discussion instructions, there are 3 different sort of structures and ways of structuring a persuasive speech that are listed. If you look at the first written presentation in course media for the week, this Diana Windingland actually lines out about 6 different ways of structuring these. So there's several of them in there. So what you're actually being asked is to choose between the ones that are actually in the intro to the discussion, and talk about the drawbacks to each of those approaches. And I put down some things in my post to sort of, I hope, give you some ideas as to how to approach that. But basically, the idea here is to, when you're doing persuasive presentations, what you're trying to do is talk about something, an issue. Maybe it's a problem on the job. Maybe the budget's kind of going wonky on the job because of whatever's going, at the company. And you're trying to implement a new control system for managing, say, inventory. That's just a thought off the top of my head at the moment. But all of these things cost more money. So somebody has to say, okay, we'll write the check. But you have to convince them. So what you do is you lay out the issue. And there's several ways of doing this. But the issue itself is laid out in a way that the person or people you're speaking to understand that issue and agree that it's relevant. And every presentation has lots of different components, even these. There's several different ways. You can lay out the issue and then offer a solution. You can take people through step by step, and then at the last issue, sort of a call for action. Let's do this. Let's do something. There are other ways of approaching it. But what you want to do is lay out what the issue is. Sometimes that means you're going to have to talk through why it's an issue. If you can't make the issue relevant, you've already lost your audience. Because if they don't see that the issue is relevant, your solution has no meaning. So then your solution has to be laid out in a way that's understandable and relevant and will actually, at least in the way you describe it, will actually deal with the issue effectively. So you want to keep that in mind as you are looking at this discussion. You're looking for picking a couple of the ways of approaching a persuasive argument, and I suggest you pick an argument of pick a problem, maybe something you've dealt with, maybe not. But look at the approaches and what are the drawbacks? Where can those fail to do the job of helping people understand the issue and come to a resolution? So that's really what's going on with this week's discussion. I posted earlier this afternoon, so it actually didn't come online till 6 o'clock, so you guys didn't have a chance to see it before class. I apologize. As I said, we've had a very bad week with my mother-in-law, and it's been tough. Been tough to find any extra time to do anything. I know that's not your problem, but I have to deal with it. So the other thing I suggest is you make sure that you do read those. Get the assignment 1 for the week is to read the readings, and they're not real long, and look at the videos, and they're not real long too. And just same as last week, explain. This week, there instead of 10 videos or 10 readings and 6 videos, there are 5 readings and 5 videos, but all the videos are short little guys. Some of them are like 1:20. So there's not a whole lot of stuff there, but there is a lot of good information about making presentations. One of the presenters, I was watching him and I was thinking, he said he's a Toastmaster, part of the Toastmasters organization, and I thought, if I were in Toastmasters, I wouldn't be bragging about you. That was my reaction to him. He did not, to me, he was not a good presenter. And part of it was his video was awful. So maybe he's very good in front of a microphone, but he was lousy in front of the camera. But nonetheless, the information's good, and he had some clips of others. It's one of the longer ones. I think it's about a 10-minute video. Had some clips in there from some other people. So it has some. So those are worth doing. The other thing I want to bring up is that I have added. I'm good at this. Since this is the first time I've taught this class, you're going to find that this happens all mod. I've added another short assignment. We talked about this as a class in communication and public speaking. So public speaking, if you're going to take a public speaking class, you should have to speak, right? Maybe you don't agree with me on that, but that's the way I think about it. So actually, the last week of class and part of your final will be a 5 to 10 minute speech on a topic of your choice related to your field of study. A very vague assignment, I understand. This week's part of that is to pick your topic, because same as in some of my other classes where we do APA papers, I often will have progress reports, and you guys remember that from last mod. In order to make sure that people are paying attention and doing the work for the paper, public speaking is harder. Well, for some people, it's harder than writing a paper. But you do have to prepare. One of the things about public speaking is prepare, and then when you're done preparing, prepare, right? Because it really can, you get up in front of an audience and I can guarantee you there are times when you just go, you've lost it all. And preparation is the key. So your first part of this assignment is just this much on a Word document. What are you going to talk about? What's your topic? Choose your topic. And then I want you to start your preparation. The last week you'll turn in a script. And if you decide to use visual aids like a PowerPoint, a copy of the PowerPoint. That'll be part of your assignment for week 4. It'll be part of your final. The final will also have some short essay questions as well about general stuff that we've covered during the mod. So I wanted to give you a heads up on that so that you can start preparing for week 4 for that talk. Okay. Now we're not asking for a 30-minute speech. I mean, I've had classes where we were told you will give a 30-minute presentation. No, 5 to 10 is fine. We don't need to make life too hard on everybody. And the classes I've had where that's been, I've had a full semester to prepare. So if I put it off to the last minute, guess whose fault that is? Not the instructors, it's mine. And I used to put them off till the last minute. I will admit. I urge you not to do that. Do as I say, not as I did, sort of thing. Okay, so that's what's coming up. You have a couple of other assignments this week, and we'll be doing an in-class activity on Wednesday. That's kind of a fun activity, and part of this week, part of the purpose of this week's class, part of communication is not just what is the language we use, what is our grammar, what is everything else. There is listening. Communication is a two-way street. Always. Those of us who have children understand the nature of that two-way street altogether too well. We've seen it. It goes back to the illusion about communication being, or the biggest fault with or problem with communication is the illusion that it's been achieved. And we see that all the time. All the time. So listening is a key to communication. And we're going to go over some, after the break, which is going to start in a few minutes, we're going to come back and we're going to sit down over some quotes of material that I think will be useful for you in thinking about the function of listening. And we'll talk about that after that. So questions? Any thoughts? Jessica?
Okay, so the
Yep.
it says choose carefully this topic because it will be the topic of the final report. Do you mean the final report that you were just speaking about, the 5 to 10 minutes related to your field study?
Oh, let's take a look at that.
Or are they two separate topics?
Just a second. You mean okay. Yeah, let's see what
is what you will be presenting in the final project.
yeah. The well, your final it's just That's really out of place. I don't know why that even stayed there. I thought I took it out.
So it is because that's it.
Yeah,
So don't be careful.
yeah, not that careful. Okay, all right. That, I'm going to look at that. I thought I'd taken that thing out because I wanted to change it. All right, don't worry about that one right now. Don't worry about that part of it right now. Yeah. 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 But thank you for pointing that out, because as I said, I went through this and I thought that had been pulled, but I may modify it a little bit to make it more sensible. But yeah, really, some of the material in there is actually useful in thinking about how you construct your own final speech. No, 5 to 10 minutes max. If it were spoken, that would be 3 to 5, as it says in there. It was sort of like, sort of like the first week's assignment 2, when you wrote a script, roughly. Give or, yeah, give or take. I'm less interested than minutia, like how many words, than quality of the material. To do it a good job, you're going to need a minimum of some amount. It's just that when you when I don't like putting word limits on things, because then people will stop when they really have more to say, or they'll complain that they couldn't come up with 500 words on their topic. And I don't think there's any topic on the planet you couldn't come up with 500 words about. But I've had that complaint. In my pharmacy classes, I have people write a report on a drug. Well, I can guarantee you that there are at least 10,000 pages of information about every single drug on the market. And I would have people say, well, I couldn't find enough material to write 3 pages. And that's because they didn't want to. It's not because they couldn't find it. It's because they didn't want to. So that's why I hate to put word limits on things. Everything should be APA format in this class. Let's just practice that as a rule. That way, in other classes, I'm not a real stickler about APA, but we have other people who are definitely the APA Nazis. So write like I'm an APA Nazi, because you're going to deal with the others anyway. I just won't worry about it if you haven't quite formatted a reference correctly or something like that. I just don't worry about it, because I'm more interested in substance than form.
So I've been using this darn citation machine.
Oh. Yeah, there are. Is there not an APA template in Word? There used to be. Really?
Creator in Word. I always use citation. I do too, but just as you say, maybe try that.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be more reliable. And we've You know, there's always the only thing I'll say about APA is that right now most technical publications, most publications, technical meaning nonfiction publications, either take APA or MLA format. I don't particularly like APA, but when I was in school and writing for publication, writing up research for publication, every single journal had its own format. It was a colossal pain in the neck. And it really is nice to have somebody say, well, use MLA or use APA, because you can get the templates for those. And Word used to have an APA template in it. Yeah. 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 An APA style paper what? Sixth edition. You know, sixth is what we officially use right now. So
does there always have to be an author? Like even if there's no author, right?
Anonymous, yeah. And there's a date or ND if there's no date. A lot of blogs and websites won't have a date of publication, but if you can find a date, use it. A lot of times they'll say updated, you know, such and such a time. And even though I have a quibble with APA format for website citations, they just say retrieved from and give the URL. And I've always believed that the proper format was to give a date that you actually retrieve the information, because those websites change all the time. And so somebody going and checking may not find what you have quoted simply because the site's changed. If you give a date, then, you know, even though it may be impossible to get back to that, it's there and it does explain a lot. But, you know, that's not the way the APA version 6 format's laid out. So, but that's just my way of doing things. So if you use the 6th edition, which is running heads and, you know, cover page, some of you put in an abstract. Abstracts are okay, although an abstract on a 2-page paper is kind of extraneous. Most of the stuff you'll write here will not require it. When you get into some of your later classes, and especially into your capstone classes, in the bachelor's programs anyway, you'll be writing much longer papers, and an abstract makes sense. When I teach the capstone project for the healthcare bachelor's program, it's a 12-page paper. And that requires an abstract in the final version. Abstract is the last thing you write. Some people say it's the first thing you write. Actually, the first thing you write is an outline of what you want to say. That can become, with proper massaging, an abstract. But most people change it as they go. So it's a good thing to write it last if you ever have to do an abstract. But an abstract is about a 250-word summary of the paper. Yeah. Yeah, you do. Yeah. You have an introduction, you have the body of the paper, and you have the conclusion. And the conclusion basically summarizes what the points that you're trying to make in your paper. Same as a speech. Conclusion should really summarize, especially when you're doing like a persuasive speech, summarize the issue and summarize the solution being proposed. keep it short. As I said before, I think in this class, people that talk about writing techniques usually say cut, 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 and cut. Take out everything that really doesn't advance the paper. And if you ever get a chance, you might read George Orwell's essay on, I think it's essay on political discourse. And he wrote it in the 30s, the 1930s. And he had 6 rules for writing. And all the usual ones, you know, never end a sentence with a preposition, blah, 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 all those things. And his last rule, however, is the most relevant rule of all, which is break any of the foregoing rather than say anything barbaric. So an example of barbaric actually comes from Winston Churchill, who was quite a wordsmith. And Churchill was making fun of the people that you know really were hard about not ending a sentence with a preposition. Okay. You know, somebody would one of the favorites is that's something I won't put up with. And of course, that breaks that rule because with is a preposition. And you're not, in English, you're not supposed to end a sentence with a preposition. And so Churchill wrote this article and he ended it with, that is something with which I shall not put up. So it made no sense as a sentence because you had to go back and say, huh, and parse it out. But he was making fun of that rule because sometimes saying it simply is the best way. Anyway, we're supposed to be on break. So let's take 15 and come back and talk more about listening. Okay. Listening. If there's one thing that Americans can't stand, it's silence. You ever noticed that? And it's not that it's totally uniquely American, but it is something that we just aren't used to silence. And part of listening is silence. You know the difference between hearing and listening? Pardon?
Understanding.
That's an aspect of it, yeah. Very good. Hearing is a physiological process. It's the transmission of signals received by the eardrum from vibrations in the air, noise, to the brain for interpretation. Listening is paying attention to those signals in terms of the information. It also means shutting off the rest of the chatter in your head. Okay. Years ago, I used to work in the pharmaceutical industry negotiating contracts. Usually contracts to acquire products from another company or sell products to another company. And I used to do a lot of negotiation. And it was really kind of interesting because I learned a couple of things when I was negotiating with Japanese.
The Japanese understand perfectly well that since Americans cannot stand silence, if you make a proposal to them, they'll sit there and look at it quietly, not say a word. And since we Americans don't like silence, we end up negotiating with ourselves and not getting a good deal. They figured this out years ago. Well, somehow or another, I think I probably read it or understood it. But when I go to Japan and I would make a proposal and it would be met with silence, not stony sort of, negative silence, just they just sit there. So I'd sit there. And one time I remember sitting for 10 minutes and nobody said, that was hard. It was hard, really, it was hard. But I managed to do it. And then we got down to business and actually negotiated. Problem with listening is that most people don't really listen. If it's, and there are times when that makes sense. There are times when I tell you what, I hear somebody groaning on it, go wandering off to what are we going to do this weekend? When I have to mow the lawn again, I don't have to do it. So I wander off into my own head because there's no reason for me to be paying attention. But altogether, too often people spend their time while other people are talking instead of actually hearing what they're saying, planning how they're going to respond. And the problem with that is when you're not listening to what the other person says, your response is going to be unrelated to what they said, more than likely. So listening is really an art form. Now we all know that. You've probably heard that all your life. Listen to me. We say it to our kids as parents. Our parents said it to us. Our teachers said it to us. Sometimes our friends will say it to us. Our spouses, significant others, whatever you want to call them. They will say that to us as well. And it's because we're not. So listening is also an art. You do have to be listening with an ear to understanding. What you have to do is shut off that critical part that says, that sends you off into sidelines when other people are talking. So that you can actually hear what they're saying. And then when they finish saying it, then you wander off into your critical sideline. What did I just do? And another part of listening is being able to ask questions, being willing to ask questions. Relevant questions. I can remember being in a conversation one time, and we were talking about, I can't remember what it was. It was something that was going on, and I had been speaking about a topic that I knew a little bit about. I was trying to learn more about, and I got done, and nothing was said. And then a little while later, when we were off on another topic, one of the people said, when you were talking about such and such, and asked a question, I said, well, why didn't you ask the question then? And his excuse was, I didn't want you to think I wasn't listening to you. Well, I thought he wasn't listening because he didn't ask anything until later. So when it's one thing to be listening to something and sort of filing away, I think I want to ask you for some detail on that topic, that statement, because it doesn't make sense. Because people will misspeak themselves. All of us do that. And somebody will say, well, you just said, no, I didn't. Yeah, you did. I didn't think I said. This is a conversation I had with my wife. I didn't think I said that. Is that what I said? That's what I heard you say. Okay, well, this is what I meant. Oh, that's okay. Yeah. But, and a lot of times, and you know, a lot of times it is, you know, you're thinking one word and another thing comes out of your mouth. Especially, you know, around our house, it gets especially bad sometimes when we're talking about friends. We'll say the name of a friend that we think we're talking about, but it will actually be somebody else's name. Maybe a similar name. Maybe we're talking about Jane and we say Janet. We know both. And I'm sitting there saying, Janet didn't do that. Oh, Jane, okay. But it does happen. So sometimes it's useful to remember that, again, the words come out of our mouths and they may not be what we're actually thinking. And it's useful if we're actually listening to what a person says and ask for clarification. That actually shows listening. Because when I say something that doesn't make sense to my wife and she said, that doesn't make any sense. What did I say? Oh, I said that. Okay. Let's clarify that one now. The way to avoid a lot of misapprehension later on. But listening is kind of an art form. Because we do have to learn to be able to hear what somebody is saying, reflect on its meaning internally without losing the thread of the rest of the conversation. And it's easy to do. Whenever I'm listening to a long presentation on a topic, even if I know something about it, it's hard to stay concentrated. And it takes some effort. And so I've learned to say, would you repeat that? I missed it. And I'll admit that I've missed it. It's taken a long time in my life to learn to say, I missed that. Can you repeat it? Because I always thought that was kind of an insult. And then it started happening to me. And I realized it wasn't an insult. It was, I missed it. Something you said triggered another set of thoughts. Those of us who have active brains, which of course everybody in this room does, that happens all the time. And really it takes effort to listen. The very, very best interviewers in news, whether it's television or radio or anything else, the very, very best interviewers are better listeners than they are talkers. Because when they hear something, they will ask relevant questions. One of the most disturbing things about I've just been listening to. I've listened to a lot of books in my car on CD because I drive a lot, and the radio is pathetic. It's a waste of time. You can find anything to listen to between the commercials. But I was just reading about an incident. It's a book called Atomic Adventures. It's about some of the really sloppy science that's been presented as reality. We're talking about something that happened in the late 1980s called cold fusion, which turned out to be completely wrong. It was a total bust. But the author was working in one of the research labs, atomic energy research labs, and they heard this interview on NPR about atomic fusion. And the interviewer asked a couple of decent questions. Obviously, it's one of their better interviewers that studied up on the topic. But the problem is, of course, since it was a totally new topic, the interviewer knew nothing about it, knew very little about fusion in general as a source of energy, but knew nothing about cold fusion because it didn't exist. Nobody had ever seen it before. And so all of the researchers are waiting for, how is this working? Give us some details. And she just changes topic. And there was, there's a good excuse. I mean, the whole thing turned out to be a total fabrication, not, I don't think deliberate. I think total misinterpretation of what it was. But the interviewer didn't know anything about the topic and was interviewing these guys as a scoop and hadn't really prepared and didn't actually consult. NPR has lots of people that will give it information and help for free. She could have gotten a lot of hints as to what kinds of questions to ask these guys, but she didn't do it. So the guys sitting around listening to this are getting more and more frustrated because they're not getting any. That's one example of how that can work. If you're going to be talking to someone, you're going to be listening, you need to know a little about what they're talking about. Doesn't mean you have to be an expert in quantum and nuclear physics, but you have to know enough to be able to ask intelligent questions, or you just make a noise. And unfortunately, there's too much of that on the radio and in television and in the media in general. But listening is key. And I have a little handout, which I thought we'd all sit and go over. And for those who might be watching the video, got two audiences here. I have it on the screen, so you can take a look at it. I'm going to give copies to everybody here in the room. There is one typo that I found, which I'll tell you about in a moment. Just wanted to be sure because I wasn't sure. I know Anika.
Yeah.
Not that. Okay. All right. So let's just go down here and take a look at each of these and see what we can learn from them about this. Some of these are from people whose names they recognize, and some of them are from people that you may not, and some of them are from people that I haven't clue about. So anyway, start with the first one. Erica, you want to read that one?
I remind myself every morning.
Right. That's from Larry King. We all know who Larry King is. Yeah, listening. And he's one of the better interviewers, actually. Because he actually studies things and you have to hear what he says. He's not an expert on everything, but he will ask intelligent questions. And sometimes tough ones. But, notice, nothing I say this day will teach me. We're saying we already know it. So if we want to learn, we need to listen. And listening, in this case, can be broadened out to reading as well. Paying attention to what's about it. Okay. Berlin?
There's a difference between listening and waiting for your turn to speak.
Yeah. That's sort of like what we talked about or what I talked about a while ago. What are you doing when you're waiting for your turn to speak?
You're listening while you're waiting.
Right? You're concentrating on what you're going to say. You're not really listening to what the other person. The words are going in. I mean, the ears work. And the signal is going to the brain, but the brain is saying, I'm busy, leave me alone. So, yeah. Okay. Jessica?
Children have never been very good at listening to their elders. But
That should be but, yeah.
they have never failed to imitate.
Yeah. And that's from James Baldwin, an African American activist and writer very, very intelligent. Never been good at listening to their own. I remember that. And never failed to imitate. So they heard and they paid attention, but they didn't do at the time. Enrique?
Somewhere we know that without silence, words lose their meaning. That without listening, speaking no longer heals. That without distance, closeness cannot cure.
All right, what does that mean? I have no idea who Henri Gallant is. I looked him up.
We can't have one.
Right. Two sides of coins. Yeah. Every coin has two sides. Back over to Erica. Robert Baden-Powell was the founder of the Boy Scouts. So that is way over a century old. Okay, in terms of the that's written. If you make listening and observation, the Boy Scouts are turning to good. Nowadays, it's going to be the Scouts because now girls are part of the same organization. It's about bloody time, in my opinion. But basically, listening and observing and teaching more. Dylan?
Listening to your instincts for when the easiest can also be the hardest thing to do.
Yep. How many times have you said, I wish I'd listened? Yeah. I can guarantee you, it still happens. It doesn't matter what your age is, you're going to do it on we see this dealing with my mother times. My instinct is saying, no, you shouldn't do that. She had a lot of trouble with her digestion this week. And we, unfortunately, against our better instinct, let her eat something she shouldn't have, and we knew it. And for 2 days, we all paid attention. She's pretty hard-headed.
I've noticed in those situations, often we'll go against our own instincts because we're swayed by those around us. And then persuasive habits, either destructive or positive, we're swayed by those around us.
Yeah.
And sometimes we regret those decisions.
Yeah, every time I have a feeling that, I should be doing something else. I find out later that I should be doing something else. I think it's been 100% for me. And I still, at my age, I'm not listening to myself. I keep trying. I'm doing better. Okay. Okay.
I write while listening to music most of the time, or beyond my headphones.
Now there's an interesting use of listening, isn't it? To shut out distractions. So he's really withdrawing into his head through distraction. Not necessarily a great thing to do. And of course, we see it all the time. I just love the video about people walking down the street, texting on their phone, walking into telephone poles. There was a scene of a guy that actually fell into an open manhole cover, open manhole. I mean, that had to hurt. And people walking out into traffic. And you think, oh Lord, you know, improving the gene pool is a good idea, but that's not the way to do it. You know,
But it's
but
understandable to me because I write while I listen to music to have that focus when you're writing,
mhm,
you know.
yeah, most people who write for a living understand that it's a very solitary job and want quiet. I'll have to talk to my son-in-law because my daughter, as I said before, my daughter's first book is published about a year from now. Actually, soon as March, I think, publication date next year. I'll have to ask Louise if she would say, leave me alone.
Yeah. I would assume that like if you don't like writing and you have like a train of thought and flow going, when you're distracted, sometimes you can lose it and it's hard to find that exact train of thought again.
Yeah.
I did the same thing like artwork. I'll only like to do this one and I'll only finish it one setting.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think with writing and with art, art is a little different, especially if you're talking about fine art, right? Because you have a design in your mind and it almost always changes. But writing is really bad about that because you'll come up with phrases, with ideas, with ways to say something. You don't write them down. I used to tell my daughter she should carry a notebook, you know, with a great line, write it. Because if she forgets it, she'll be really unhappy. And if it's not really a great line later on, she can always erase it. Right? But if you erase it de facto by forgetting it, you never have a chance to find out. So, yeah. Here we go.
Listening is active. At its most basic level, it's about focus and paying attention.
Right. Focus and paying attention. That's really one of the things that is hardest for us to do is to really focus on listening. You know, 'cause I'm hearing Karen next door. She's probably hearing us. Now, these walls are kind of like paper. In a room form. But it can be very distracting. And I'm sure that Caroline, when you were in John's class last month across the hall from us, I'm sure I was too much.
I'm going to repeat it, what you said, and John was like, what are you talking about?
It's just a refresher on
Yeah. And that is my book. One advantage of talking to yourself is that you know somebody. Now there's a real interesting statement. And it also says that we never know when we're talking if anyone else is actually listening. And these days, we've got computers and phones and all these things and people are listening. I can't tell you how many times I'll tell my daughter, are you listening? And she's, yeah, of course. What did I say?
Yes, listening.
I
heard you.
Heard that.
Doesn't matter if I heard Kathy.
Thank you. Okay. by listening to them. That is from the man who was John Kennedy's secretary. So, you know, he was a man that understood the art of listening. He was a really fine man. One of the last really good diplomats I think we had. But he is someone that used to spend his time. Caroline?
What's something that's been able to be changed by the other person?
Now, there's an interesting statement. Where he throws that with.
That goes deeper beyond listening, but being able to understand feelings beyond that.
Yeah, there's a lot to that statement. Of course, we all know what LNL is. Jessica.
Who's out and all that.
Oh, really? Oh.
No.
There are times. Alan Alda is an actor. He is an actor and activist, social activist. And pardon? He played Hawkeye Pierce on
Oh, okay. I know what you're talking about.
Pardon?
60s, 50s, when was that?
No, that's right. Oh, no, the movie match came
I didn't know there was a movie.
out in 69 or 70. I was and it was a TV show in the 80s.
I've heard of the TV show.
The movie was very different.
Was it in color?
Yeah.
The show's in black and white, isn't it?
No.
Sure was okay.
No, I remember it.
That's right.
It must
Which is kind of based on a satirical novel by and wrote this as I think cathartic for his experiences in Korea, and it turned into a movie. Wrote it off and made it into a movie that was hilarious. Of course, made more hilarious by the fact that it came out when I was in the Army. We all saw him on the Army theater. I was surprised they didn't show it on tape, but they did. And it was really literally an attack on the whole issue of war, not just Vietnam. The TV show conveyed that very well, but changed the story a lot. The movie was an hour, about a long TV show lasted for years. Yeah. Yeah, Alan Alda played the lead there. He was also a Broadway actor beforehand, acted in some movies. But he is still active. We just saw a documentary about revival October, and apparently Truman and Alda are close friends, and so Alda appeared in it. I mean, he got old. He really has, but he still has that same voice and a wit. He has a wit.
What was he an activist
social justice, the whole issue of race relations, and that sort of all of those things. He's been an activist in those areas for many years. He's married to a Jewish lady, so he has a lot of issues with places, people like the Klan, which are very much anti-Jewish, or the pro-lynch Jewish. And so they are good friends. He's Catholic, all his Catholic. Not unusual to see Catholics and Jews married. So, they get along pretty well. But you know, he's an interesting character as an actor and as a human being. And he seems like a really decent human being. But he never got into the big Hollywood stuff, with drugs and other things that seem to be popular. So, last one.
Wisdom is the reward you get for a lifetime of listening when you
Right? You'd have preferred to talk. You know, hardest thing to do for us is to learn to listen. When we're kids, do we ever listen? No, we're running around having too much fun. Our parents say something, we blow it off until they make us do it. We're lucky to just make us do it. If we're not, we get clobbered and then we do it anyway. So, but listening when you prefer to talk is much more of a key. So, any thoughts on some of these ideas? Pardon? They are. They are. There are many others as well, I'm sure. Happens to be a compilation managed to put together from various sources. Obviously, I didn't make them up. But I do believe that one of our biggest problems is listening.
I agree. I see it so much in the workplace, like where it's not really a career, where there's a high turnover industry. There's so many different miscommunications, and people are so willing to like throw away their job just because of miscommunications and like egos. Ego is like the biggest thing that I found that prevents people from listening because they think that they're right, and if they don't think that they have anything to learn.
And they don't want to hear anything outside of their box. Their box is their life, and that's the way it's gonna go.
Yeah, they don't improve, they don't go further, they don't.
I have a friend that's never done the job. He gets told what he's doing wrong, and I'm not doing anything wrong. I quit.
I'm okay.
You got 5 kids at home. You don't want to do that.
More responsibility. And I see that so often because most of them, you know, some of those that have been there for years, you can see that loyalty and that, I guess, the value they have in their position and most of all, the value they have in their relationships with management, with the people around them, with their coworkers. And it's not just management, it's actually coworkers too. And having that comfortable environment is so important. And not having those miscommunications, you know. I just moved over to this new shop, so I'm just like integrating myself with the problems that are existing there in the communication and with what's going on with the area. You know, what do you do with it? There's nothing you can do with it, you know. You just gotta. There's like a fine line you have to walk between like not encouraging arrogant boasting statements, but also not being rude and just shutting them down, but just kind of directing them another.
Well, it certainly has been an old platitude. You all right?
Yeah.
No.
I didn't know if I could see through there.
bad thing about the circle line.
Yeah, it does make things a little bit.
Well, I was gonna have to step over the board.
Oh,
Oh, no.
Well,
See,
you
we're
know,
space
there
like-
are absolutely times when I think.
Well, you should
Too
Well,
late
part of me
now.
realizes that that would be a little. I wouldn't want. No, the one of the big things. If you look at news coverage of various times when people are disagreeing with each other, all they're doing is screaming in each other's faces. And what are you hearing when you're screaming? You're not hearing anything. You're hearing the vibration of your own voice. Because you've already lost the ability for rational thought when you start screaming. Yeah, and that we see a lot. People hear what they want to hear. And to some extent, since there's so much noise out there, I mean, there's just, if you look, it used to be that, a disagreement usually had just a couple of sides. Now, you've got 20 people in a room disagreeing about something, and you've got 25 different units going on, 20 people. It just doesn't do any good. You look at one of the reasons that I don't pay attention to politics is because people are just screaming at each other. They're not really discussing issues. They're just screaming, my way is the only way. When you have locked out this, and you hit the nail on the head. A lot of it's ego, but other parts of it come from a feeling of powerlessness. If you have no ability to influence the forces that affect your life, then you do whatever you can to feel like you're in control. And unfortunately, in our society, that means screaming. You're not in control. You're not in control of screaming. And so listening is critical. If we're going to survive as a society, we need to start listening to each other. Because we're watching the effects of people just talking past each other. All you have to do is look at Congress. I don't know or care what anyone thinks about the Affordable Health Care Act, the Obamacare, locally. But I was teaching during the debate a couple of falls ago, or last fall, about trying to get rid of Obamacare. I was teaching a class in the healthcare system, and there were 4 students in the class. They were about equally divided between people who thought that it was awful and people who thought that it seemed to be helping them. And so we had long conversations about the bill. We talked about it. I had people studying it, writing papers. And in the end, the people that thought it was awful had changed their minds on their own. Nobody tried to make them think. What they did was they studied the issue and realized that, yeah, it's anything but perfect, but just getting rid of it and taking healthcare away from millions of people, the ability to get healthcare away from millions of people is probably not the right answer. And in fact, they all ended up supporting not changing it because there was no viable alternative. So if you give people a chance, they'll change their mind. because they stopped listening to the propaganda and actually read what they found out what it said, and discovered that it wasn't so bad after all. You had little parts of it that were awful, but there are other parts of it that really have helped a lot of people. We had one student in the class who would have 2 rounds of breast cancer. The first round was pre-Obamacare, and they just about went bankrupt paying for their health care. The second round was fully paid for by Obama. He was, needless to say, very much supportive of it. But the fact of her experience actually affected the other people, because they heard from someone they knew about it instead of just the propaganda. And in reality, that's what listening is about. It's about throwing the propaganda where it belongs, in the trash, and looking for truth. And then you find out sometimes the things that you thought were truth are the things that go in the trash, and other times the other way around. But that's the whole idea of listening with an understanding ear, a brain that is interested in learning the truth. And the only way anymore you can do that is to essentially independently investigate facts. And that's hard. And listening to people isn't necessarily a good way to get facts, but it's a good way to understand how they think. And, there are all sorts of ways of thinking about it. But it was an interesting exercise, just going over that whole topic of the affordable health care. Because there was a lot of, I remember, to further date myself, I remember the debate over Medicare. When, because I was a senior in high school when Medicare was being debated back in the mid-60s. And I remember all the arguments. The AMA was utterly opposed to it. It was really kind of interesting because that cost the AMA a large chunk of it, because the leadership of the AMA was throwing lots of money into lobbying that the membership didn't particularly appreciate. And they didn't buy it because they were looking at their patients, especially obviously their elderly, but also their disabled patients who could not get medical care. And so they were supporting it. And the AMA was screaming, slogans. Socialized medicine was their favorite slogan. The other part of it was, do you want some government bureaucrat deciding on what health care you'll get? And there was a lot of that. Well, first off, it wasn't socialized medicine. If you investigated what socialized medicine was, if you wanted socialized medicine, run for Congress, because that's what they have. Socialized medicine is when the doctors are employed by the government. Congress has its own doctor. So Congress had socialized medicine. That's good enough for them. Why isn't it good enough for us? That was one argument. Another was that, other countries that have socialized medicine, what we call socialized medicine, countries like France, are structured, their medical system is structured, at least in terms of the business structure, exactly like ours. Independent practitioners who have their own practices, they have hospital privileges, very few of them work for the government, they get paid by the insurance pool that the government has established. The only difference is the government is the insurer, not Aetna or Blue Cross Blue Shield. And so that was good. And the other part, even as a high school student, I thought, what's the difference between a government employee deciding on my medical care and an accountant for an insurance company deciding on medical care? neither of them knows jack about medicine. So why should, what difference does that make? So there was a lot of stuff going on. And now you just try to do what is necessary. Because those of us on Medicare, you want to lose your job? That's a good way to do it. So we won't see changes. Because too many congressmen and senators would lose their jobs, have to go get honest work. That's my opinion. Obviously, I'm showing my bias. But, they would have to go out and work. And so, it's kind of an interesting debate. And very much interested, I was very much interested in watching now, some 60 years later, the debate about Obamacare coming back again. Just, kind of what goes around comes around. So the whole thing with any of this is learning to listen to what people are actually saying and then check. These days, people say the most. And if nobody checks them, they become considered true. So that's what listening is about, listening and evaluating. And when in doubt, say nothing. Silence is good. It's really good. Sometimes I like to get up in the morning early and sit out on my back porch with a cup of coffee and just listen to the birds. The only sound of music. The occasional car goes by, real small. But just sitting in the quiet and thinking. But anyway, anything else anyone has to say? All right, any thought? I know here we are, we're going right back to the beginning now, and I know you haven't had much time, but do you have any preliminary thoughts about what you'd like to do your speech about? Just wanted to put that prompt out there so you think about it.
Do you want to do that career choice?
Yeah, that would be my suggestion. If you wanted to talk about, baseball in the 1860s, that would be okay. About it, I don't.
I did like a lot of motivational speeches in forensics in school, which are all totally different, motivational speeches.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, motivational speech. I heard so many. Well, if you have a tutor one, I will listen. But I'll tell you, I do have. I've heard so many that have been full of platitudes and more rah-rah, etc. But there's nothing wrong with motivation. But you have to be careful not to come off sounding like it's a sermon.
Yeah. Well, some of my most favorite inspiration would be the motivational speakers, and you were just talking about Jerry King. He was such a good speaker. He spoke with so much passion, and that's really what I think what makes a good speaker.
Mm-hmm.
Passion.
Yeah.
And Martin Luther King. Yeah, that pretty much sermons. It was very churchy, but it's super, it gets you super deep, and just the way that he emphasizes his words, unlike anybody else.
If you like Martin Luther King, you may want to look up the Reverend William S. Barber. He has sort of taken on Martin Luther King. And he is fascinating. He has a disease that actually has an autoimmune disease called ankylosing spondylitis, which is a disease that really locks up the spine. So he's in pain much of the time, right on the trucking. And he's amazing. He's an amazing speaker. William S. Barber. He's a reverend, forget which, I want to say Anglican, but I don't think so.
I really like it.
Based out of North Carolina. Pardon?
I really like the stories of people that have like triumphed through hardship and
Yeah.
tragedy. And that's, I think, the most inspirational and motivation.
There can be some really, really good stories about people who really dealt with issues. And what you usually find is a common thread in most of those is an enduring faith of some sort that allows them to keep going when many other people who don't have that conviction of there being something beyond this world just don't seem to be able to do. So it's kind of they can be very interesting. But I've been through some presentations that are kind of hokey in terms of the motivational speeches.
I can see the repetitive, like, idioms.
Yeah.
Or just like, things that you hear, cliches, all the time, they're
Yeah, when something goes from being for sure. Anyway, it's now about time to close up. So, any other questions? I have a video I'm going to show on Wednesday. It's just a total aside, just a fun video. Hilarious. So I'm going to show that on Wednesday. We have an in-class activity about listening on Wednesday. So that'll be a fun one. Hope we have more people here. If we have time, we'll get started on non-verbal communication, another tremendous aspect of communication, and actually plays into speaking, the non-verbal part of speaking or part of the presentation to either really get your audience hooked or really. So we'll do that. I want to do non-verbal as well. Maybe a couple of interesting things to do. Okay, thank you all for being here. Appreciate it. Reorganize the tables. Nice.
Please.